In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, by offering his peace and blessings on his most beloved prophet, we start our second practical lesson, or I should say our second practical session, which is the continuation of the first lesson entitled Economic Systems. Due to the nature of the topic, I had to divide it into two, although this session will be long, I think, because we have a lot to see. All right, so I would like to thank you for your attendance. I appreciate it very much, and hopefully you keep on benefiting from this seminar. So, as we said, we will now discover some implementations of economic systems throughout history. It will be a comparative analysis. All right, we will try to compare different implementations while using, obviously, objective criteria. We should try and see which is the best implementation of an economic system in history. This is our goal. So, of course, it's not possible to go over all the implementations, or else it will take forever. I could come here and talk about ancient Egypt's economic system, or ancient Mesopotamia, or the Inca and Maya. But, you know, that's old history, too old, and they relied on traditional economy so much. So it's better to start where humans have made big strides and civilization has developed. And I saw that the best example to start with is ancient Rome. All right. So this is ancient Rome, and we have to make a difference between the Roman Empire before antiquity and after antiquity and after Christ. There are different stages. Ancient Rome, we are talking here about much before Christ. We are talking 500 BC, 300 BC, etc. So the first thing that we should know about ancient Roman economy is that it is a mixed economic system. So now, like I said, humans have developed and they were able to use a mixed economic system where private enterprises exist, yet the state supervises key sectors. Like what? Like agriculture, mining, and infrastructure. So it's mixed. All right. Yes, people can have their own businesses, yet these important sectors are supervised and controlled by the government, the state. Now, this economic system relies heavily on taxation and war bounty. To do what? To cover public expenditure. It means government spender or government spending. So, for the government to spend on the economy, they rely on taxation. They tax the people, and of course, back then, war bounties were the norm, which should be the norm. Now, what are the reasons for the downfall of the ancient Roman economy? First thing, high military spending. They spent too much of their resources on military. The ancient Roman Empire was very ambitious, and they seek to control all of the world if they could. So they were keen on making more expansions, conquering the other empires, especially what is the biggest enemy of the ancient Roman Empire? Can someone tell me the answer?
Persian before Arabs, of course. Islamic Empire.
Very good. Yes. The Persian Empire, which is called the Sasanian Empire. Right. They were their biggest rivals, and they suffered a lot of defeats through their hands. And so they, at some point, drove each other to economic stagnation and sometimes crisis. Right? But also Arabs, Muslims played a similar role and handed even more defeats to the ancient Roman Empire. Although at that point, it's not called ancient Roman. All right, at that point, it's called Eastern Roman Empire because the Roman Empire was divided between Western and Eastern. At that point, it no longer became or remained the ancient Rome. After that, the Western Roman Empire fell, it dissolved, and they called it the fall of Rome. So only the Eastern Roman Empire remained. The other name of the Eastern Roman Empire, can someone give me the answer to that? What do they call it?
Byzantine maybe?
Right, excellent. Byzantine. Right. The Byzantine Empire. That's the Eastern Roman Empire. And the capital is the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Very good, yes.
Constantine.
Constantinople. Excellent. So Muslims in their wars were fighting the Byzantine Empire. All right. So we said that high military spending caused some crisis. Also, we have price increase, which is a form of inflation. Now, even if you have money that is backed by gold or made of gold, if you increase the prices too much, then eventually this money will lose some of its value. Not because gold has lost its value, but because the prices are higher. So the regulation of the market was not consistent. Also, we have social inequality. All right, this was a big reason for that. And abuse of power. By who? By the government, of course, and the officials. Through this fiscal policy, through taxation, and so on. So all of these are factors of their decline. In a nutshell, we can summarize this by saying that the lack of an ethical code of conduct is really the reason why this type of economy has failed. All right? If you have an ethical code that will prevent you from increasing these prices or from doing injustices and keeping inequality, etc., or abusing your power, then of course you will not result yourself into these problems. So this was the first implementation that we will see in this session. Moving on, after the Byzantine Empire, we have the Holy Roman Empire in an era which was called medieval Europe. Now, Holy Roman Empire is not really the continuation of the Roman Empire. This was just how historians described or gave the name to the empire that Charlemagne, King Charlemagne, has started. And because the Pope at that time gave the title of Roman Empire to King Charlemagne. All right, but actually they never claimed to be a continuation and were vastly different in some regards. So more or less we are talking here about medieval Europe. Now after the rise of Christianity in Europe and the fall of Rome, like we said, the Western Roman Empire has fallen. How did this impact the economic system of Europe during the medieval period? Here we are still talking about the Byzantine Empire plus the Holy Roman Empire. It's both because Christianity rose into prominence when? Do you know when it became an official religion of the states? Or who made it the official religion? It was Constantine, the Roman Empire, who was the first Roman Empire to convert to Christianity. Christianity has already spread to a large extent before he converted, and this was one of the reasons why he converted, probably the main reason why. He saw that Christianity has become popular, or we can say the new trend, but he made sure to modify it to such a large extent. All right. He was also the one responsible for the Council of Nicaea, where they will agree on the official creed of Christianity, aka the Trinity. And we have all the reasons to suspect that he wanted it to take that route. Because, you know, the Romans were pagans. That's why we can see that Christianity has taken a lot of pagan traditions into it. So the question here, right, they are used to the concept of multiple gods. So they try to come up with some sort of concept that keeps monotheism and polytheism happy, which is a contradiction, obviously. So the question here is, how did this impact the economic system of Europe during the medieval period? We are talking here about the church, the rise of power of the church. How did this impact the economic system? Can you guess?
Badly, must be.
Can you elaborate or give some examples on that? How or why do you think it impacted it badly? Of course, the change was in the nature of such economic system. Right? Do you have a response?
Like, I think, I'm not sure. They no longer had like a free market. Like they had I don't know what's called in English, but
Very good, yes.
slaves, and they have different.
Right. The free market no longer existed, and the church took control of everything. Now, when it comes to social hierarchy, it was already the case before. In the Roman Empire, there were social classes and hierarchies. So it remained the same, actually. And we can even argue that the church tried somewhat to rectify that to some extent. All right? We should be objective and say that it, uh, it was better in this department than so-called Roman Empire. Not always, of course, because Romans went through different stages, and even they, pagan or Christian, just like us, they have good rulers and bad rulers. So in their heyday and their best days, you will find society happy. And for example, if they had their own Hajjaj, everyone will be mad. All right. So the Churchian slash Christian economy. This name I came up with. It's not really the official name for this economy. Doesn't have really. They didn't come up with any name for it. They say that this is medieval Europe, medieval economy, or they say feudal economy. But feudalism is after the Churchian economy. That's why I made sure to talk about it. So let's understand first the type of power and role that the church plays in that era. So the medieval church was a complex institution that provided public and private goods and services to the people. It was not simply a religious institution. This is, of course, because Constantine made it an institution religion. He controlled the church. So the church became part of politics and as well economy. All right? This is one of the key differences between the church or Christianity, so to say, and Islam. In Islam, we don't have something called the mosque, at least in history. All right? We are talking about the implementations when it was an Islamic state. There was no institutionalized religion. Religion was free. The scholars actually detested being part of the state, and they discouraged it, and you know the rest. Therefore, it stayed free in its stance, and it was not used as a tool. But in the case of the church, the total opposite happened because Christians were oppressed in the time of the Roman Empire, in the first and second, even to the first part of the third century. They were oppressed, they were killed, and the moment that they started gaining popularity and acceptance from the Roman Empire, of course, they would not waste the chance of becoming the official religion of the state. So we can say that it started from a position of weakness And here we are talking about power relations. Therefore, like one of you said, it is not Christianity that prevailed, but Christianity has been Romanized. So, this form of rulership, we call it theocracy. Theocracy. In Islam, we don't have theocracy. All right? Even though you should rule by what the book has revealed, theocracy means that it is the rulership of God Himself on earth through a representative. But in Christianity, it's more than just a representative, because the church fathers and even the emperor claim to be or to have contact, direct contact with God, and whatever they did was the truth. Whatever they ordered was not to be denied, was not to be discussed. We don't have that in Islam. Although there are some attempts to do it. Okay. So due to this theocratic nature of the church, it succeeded in becoming a monopolistic entity stronger than monarchs themselves. Through time, the church became so powerful that it could rival and even exceed the power of monarchs. Now, here we are talking further from the Byzantine Empire. Now, after that came the Holy Roman Empire, and there were a lot of monarchs who pledged allegiance to the Catholic Church, to the Vatican. So these monarchs could not actually rule without giving a say to the church, without taking their permissions, etc. And that's why the English king decided to make his own branch, the Anglophone church, because he wanted to be separate. He wanted to be independent of the Vatican. The church functioned as a political and economic firm, enforcing policies, laws, and conduct codes. So this was the role of the church back then. It was political and economic, as well as religious, of course. And even the religious part has turned into some sort of economy. How so? Can you think of an example that the church does, even to this day, which is a form of providing a service?
صكوك الغفران.
Right. Yes. Now they ask people to give money so that their sins may be forgiven. All right, whatever you do, just come, give a pension to the church, and you're good to go. So this was practically not only a scam, but it was a business. I wonder what would a Christian think about this seminar if he sees it in YouTube. But we are talking the truth. And even the Protestants say these things. These are their critics, which are actually 100% correct. It does not really exist in the Bible. It was not practiced by even the early church fathers. Now, there was also something else that the church did, which is imposing a 10% income tax on all individuals living under Catholic Church domain. If you want to search about it, it's called the Tithin tax, the Tithin tax, or the parish system. There are other types of taxes, like the papal tax, which was only done within the church. Okay, so the monks and those working in the church basically had to pay some sort of tax to the church itself. Now, the explanation that they gave was not actually correct to begin with. They said that in the Mosaic law, the people of Moses, peace be upon him, had to pay some sort of tax for the church to wage, I'm sorry, not the church, but for Moses himself and the army to wage wars to cover the expenses. This is actually not true. It is not found in the Bible. So it was also a scam. But of course, you could not disagree, or else you would be a heretic and you will be put to death. So, as we can see, this is not a free market. This is actually the total opposite. In essence, usury, which is interest, was prohibited by the church. So the church uh, did not say that usury is allowed. It understood that it was a way to use and manipulate the poor, yet it was allowed in certain forms, only for the church to benefit from. So between the people, it was not allowed, but they found some ways to benefit from it. To explain that is kind of complicated. There are two types of contracts, but let's not dive too deep into that because we have a lot to see. So, in a nutshell, this was the church economy. What do you think about it? In relation to the Roman Empire, for example. We can argue that it was even worse in general. All right. That's because it was built on falsehood. And even though they have an ethical code, actually, even if they just followed the Bible itself with its alterations, it would have resulted into a much better economy. But they believed in some parts of the book and disbelieved in others. Right, the people were cooked. And that's why they call it the Dark Ages, the medieval period. So, Dark Ages, because of such reasons, the church was totally abusing its power. And it was a monopoly. We can see how monopolies today are very detrimental to economy. Moving on, like I said, we have feudalism. Now, feudalism still in the medieval period and before the Industrial Revolution. So, order needed to be created since Rome wasn't around to keep it anymore. The fall of Rome, all right, and the weakness of the Byzantine Empire. We should understand then the social structure of the feudalistic society. First, we have at the top. So it was like a pyramid. All right. At the top, you have the elites, kings and queens. You can add even politicians in general. All right. After that, we have the nobles or the aristocrats. Those were the high class back then. Directly under them are knights. Knights had some importance, but not as much as nobles and the elite. And at the end, at the bottom of the pyramid, we have peasants. Peasants are the working class in general, no matter what is your job. You could be a carpenter, you could be a shepherd, whatever. If you work, you are a peasant. Aside from knights, it was a job, but it enjoyed some advantages. Now, all of these elements, all of these social classes, they had contracts. The peasants are controlled and work for the knights. The knights are controlled and they have allegiance to the nobles. And the same is between the nobles and the king and the queen. Now, everything in essence belongs to the king and queen or the elites in general. However, what did they do? They distributed their uh, lands and resources on many noble families. All right? These noble families also did the same. They distributed their wealth and their properties to knights and sometimes to peasants directly. However, knights played a big role in protection. All right? They needed to be protected, so the knights worked for the nobles to protect the properties. And of course, to wage wars and protect the nation in general. So this is the feudalistic system in very simple terms. It is much more complicated than this, obviously, but just to understand the structure. So let's see now, or let's talk more about this economic system. The peasants are at the bottom, therefore, obviously, we can see that this is totally unequal and does not provide the chance or the opportunity to become better. All right, you have little flexibility. Of course, not all of the peasant jobs are the same, but all peasants live a miserable life. So this was just a pyramidic economic system. It was very simplistic, uh, a command system where the elites are controlling everything. And again, this is why it was called the Dark Ages. The feudalistic system existed simultaneously while the church had so much power, as well as a certain period after that when the church started to lose some of its power. Now we have what we call mercantilism. Let's move on quickly from this one because it's simple and did not last too long. This economic system arose in between the 16th and 18th century at the height of colonialism. At this point, it was also the start of industrial revolution and the start of imperialism, colonialism. Western empires rose to power, while Eastern empires weakened. This was the real change in history, which we are still suffering from to this day. Now, this economic system heavily relies on trade. Why? Because it was also a time of discovery. A lot of discovery plans started at that point. The Western ones, of course. That's when they discovered the New World, the Americas, and some parts of Africa as well. And, you know, the means of transport started to develop. So that's why it's heavily relied on trade. Why? To ensure state power at the expense of rivals. At that point, all of whether there were kingdoms or empires were in competition. For what? For natural resources from the colonies that they conquered in Africa, in South America, and Asia, and so on, even within Europe itself. Why? To become stronger than the rivals. And you can see here that the grains or the roots of a world war was starting to to grow. We can trace back the First World War to these events. Anyways, not to divert, it relied on augmenting exports and reducing imports. This simple but very effective strategy, which we call the positive balance. If you have a positive balance, a significant one, then you are doing very good in terms of national wealth. And of course, the opportunity was there to do so. Why? You can no longer rely simply on your own resources. They conquered different places of the earth and they enjoyed their natural resources plus the human capital. So it is self sufficiency through a positive balance of trade. That's how we can summarize it. As well, the feudalistic power structure began to be seen as outdated. At that point, they started to move on from the feudalistic system. It still existed to some extent, but changes started to occur. Opportunities started to appear. It was a gradual change to a more free market. Colonies must serve as suppliers of raw materials. This is what I already mentioned. And there was a code that all of conquerors worked by, which is manufacturing is only allowed in the mother country. That's why they left their colonies even after they went out from them in such a miserable state most of the time. That's the main reason because their own benefit was to simply get the resources and the production cycle should only be in the mother country. Why? Because if you do it in colonies, they will benefit from it. They will know how to produce. So they were reluctant to share this important knowledge. We can see the difference or the difference between the ways that the Western empires colonized in regards to the Islamic ways to do it. It's totally different. And that's why whenever someone claims that Muslims were colonizers, they are not knowing what they talk about. All right, now we arrive to the big villain who appears to be a righteous hero, which is capitalism. Now, I already spoke too much. So, you have this image in front of you. I would like to give, I would like you to give a comprehensive definition of capitalism based on this image, based on your interpretation of this image. This image summarizes all of what capitalism is. And of course, all of you know about it already, but to hear what you have to say, can you define what is capitalism? It is very key to understand the concepts, to know how to define it. Answering the WH questions. Right? Does someone have an answer? Yes, please.
Uh, from what I understood from the picture, is that it promotes that it declares that it promotes a free market, and that
Hmm.
everyone can have the chance to like to scale up and maybe be from the elite. But
Right.
as soon as you try or like try to scale the ladder, they pull it off or something like that.
Very good. I like the way you interpret the image. All of these people are competing, and only one person is holding the ladder. Do you think that this person can hold on to all of these people so that they all join him at the top? Of course not. It is not possible, even if he wants to. That is the irony of capitalism. It tells you and sells you the idea of everyone can achieve it, but the system itself does not allow everyone to achieve it. Which begs the question of who came up with such devilish concept. All right, let's see the main principles of capitalism and answer the WH questions. The first question, what is capitalism? Simply put, capitalism is a system that promotes private ownership of production means. It promotes, calls for, encourages the private ownership of the means of production. It means free market. When you own the production means? It means that you can produce. It means that you have the opportunity and the chance to do it. When and where? All right. It started in the 18th century, after mercantilism, post-industrial revolution. Now, where? It started in different places, but the first place is UK, then the United States. All right, these are the first nations to implement capitalism as we know it. Then the rest followed instantly. It did not take long before it spread wide. Why? What do we mean by why? It means, what is the purpose? Why should we implement capitalism, or why is it implemented? So capitalism's main purpose is simply making profit. It's not about making your lives better or uh, eradicating inequality or fighting abuse of power. No, no such thing. The main purpose is making profits. Now, how? How can we make profits through capitalism? By creating and stimulating as much need, between parentheses, demand, as possible. This is the only way to do it. To make as much profit as possible, you need as much demand as possible. This is logical. But, of course, if you keep it as God intended it to be, there can only be so much demand. At one point, you will reach stagnation. It cannot go any further. Demands of humans are simple and clear. We're talking generally. Therefore, what should we do to keep making profit? We should provide as much money as possible. Through what? Through modern banking system. This is tied to what we saw in the previous session. All right? It is the continuous printing and putting money in the economy by the government, sometimes without any borders or any limitations. Excellent, yes, very good point. They also relied on creating problems. Why? Because by creating these problems, you will create needs. And of course, when you create a need, you are, by definition, creating a supply and paying for that supply, and the economic cycle keeps on going. Sometimes, and especially in our time, they create problems that do not even need solutions, should not even be considered problems. But they have successfully made humans and societies in general consumerists to the point that they succeed. People buy things that they do not even need and do not even enjoy sometimes. Or the price is nowhere near the extent of enjoyment that you get from the product. This tells you about the ideological aspect of capitalism. Here, it is good to mention that these economic systems, especially the modern ones, have an ideological background, dimension, and it is more important than the economic system itself. It cannot exist without it. If you do not understand the ideological dimension of the economic system, you will never be able to explain many phenomena. and you will fall victim to the system. Again, all of these are power relations. They do not escape that concept. Now, the last question is who? Who is responsible for capitalism? We all know who. All right. Yes. Who is responsible for the modern banking system? You need to go to the root to understand who is the owner of capitalism or who is the responsible side of it. In fact, it is documented that the Jews are the owners of the global banking system. This is not even something to hide. Which explains really the devilish concepts within capitalism and money in general. Now, one last thing that should be mentioned is that capitalism has constantly evolved due to globalism. Why? Because capitalism is a free market, okay, in essence. Therefore, the more it expands, the better it is. And since now products are global due to globalism, then the benefits of that are much greater. Instead of simply targeting your clients in one part of the world, now you are targeting everyone everywhere. Right, now let's move on to, yes, we will see some ideological aspects of these systems, but I'm mentioning some of them along the way. All right. Here we will discuss some of it, which is about the social classes. Now, it is thought that classical and antiquity social classes, like the pyramid classes we saw in the feudalistic system or in ancient Rome, etc., no longer existed. They were extinguished. Why? Due to this wonderful new system that allows for free competitiveness. However, that is far from the truth. Let's see how that's the case. I will try to enlarge this picture. Or can you see it clearly now without having to enlarge it?
We can zoom in ourselves, I guess.
Yeah, I'm trying to zoom in, but
I mean,
I
we
think
can
it does
zoom
not want to. All
we
right.
can zoom ourselves. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Can we call this a pyramid, so to say? From this image, this illustration. Is this a pyramid? Yes and no. All right, it's not really a pyramid for the simple fact that it is too wide in certain areas. But one thing for sure is that it is a hierarchy, all right, a horizontal, sorry, vertical. Yes, it's a vertical social structure. Let's see the bottom. What do we have? Here we have people who study. Okay, in fact, the picture was too big that some social status at the bottom could not be included. We will talk about them later, but let's just tackle these ones. We have people who study, all right? We have here a woman with her kids in their house, and the dad is watching TV. Such a base dad, leaving his wife to do all the work. I'm kind of ironic. And what else do we have? I think this is a police officer who came to investigate someone in their house. Anyways, this is at the bottom. In top of that, we have people working in a corporate company. We have here some criminals. All right, they are maybe looting some bank or whatever. Criminals then are better than the ones at the bottom, which is true. Right, anarchists. Yes, maybe they are anarchists, but that's going a little bit too far. Because anarchy is an ideology, which is against capitalism, yes. And we have here people who are consuming products. That's what the image is trying to say. On top of that, we still have some kind of jobs. Mechanics, maybe, or people who engineer cars. And doctors, they are performing a surgery. At the sides, what do we have? We have a ladder. People are climbing. From where? From the school. All right? Sorry. They are climbing. Some of them become criminals. Some of them become doctors and engineers. And some of them become CEOs and entrepreneurs. People who own a considerable amount of capital. Very well paid jobs. On top of that, we have the court. And as well, maybe this is a private doctor who has his own cabinet. And we know that these people make a lot of money, obviously. Here, maybe this one is a scientist or an inventor, innovator, which are also kind of part from elites. Even beyond that, we have what we are starting to talk about: politicians, people in power, people in decision-making seats. These are congressmen or whatever, prime ministers, etc. This is a general of war, obviously, of military. And at the top of the top, we have presidents, the elites, people who make the absolute decisions. So, this illustration serves what? Serves to show you that social classes are still existing. In fact, to a degree that is further than previous economic systems. The only difference, and this is what helps it sell the illusion and the lie that capitalism is better and more equal. The only reason is that they divided it into too many classes. That's why people in this area are content, more or less. All right, the middle class. They are living. They are going on about their days. They are surviving. All right, but at the very bottom, how is it different than the peasant? It is not different. They are working jobs and enjoying as much rights and as much opportunities as peasants of previous era. So at the end of the day, only titles and functions changed. In its core, the same injustices still exist. And and this is what will take us to the next economic system. This is the Marxist criticism to capitalism. It claims that the same thing still exists. You changed all of these things only to achieve the same results. Of course, let's not be subjective in a sense. Capitalism did improve the lives of people if we compare it to feudalism. That's the case. If you compare it to feudalism, yes, capitalism is considerably better. But is that sufficient for us to be content about it and to not highlight these injustices? Of course not. But capitalists want you to be content and to not seek anything further or rectify these injustices or critique all of these things, etc. And they have the belief that capitalism is the best possible economic system. All of the economists have this belief that capitalism is the best possible economic system, and you could not realistically come up with anything better. But we will see how wrong they are. Before we move on to communism, do you have any questions? Anything you want to add? Everything is clear? Yes, that's very funny what you said. That's pretty much it. ولكن بدلوا لهم المعالق بالمغارف، داروا ديك المغارف ديال الخشب صراحة كيزيدوا في المذاق شوية، كيكون كتكون البنة واحد شوية. So yeah, that's how it's better.
Uh, my only criticism about the picture maybe is that the bankers supposed to be on the top.
Right, really, that's true. But this image is actually accurate because the bankers never appear in front. The
Yes, they try.
JEWS do not uh, show themselves in front and claim that they are responsible. So the same thing happens even for the global banking system. They claim that it is just a tool and it's not the one controlling the others, but in fact, it is the one that controls even presidents and whole nations. But it is good that you mentioned it because, yes, it is at the top of the capitalistic social structure. Now let's move on to a very interesting case in history, which is communism. Now, to define communism, it is a political and economist ideology best represented by the works and ideas of Karl Marx. Now, communism did not start with Marx. We should understand that. Communism started before. There were different thinkers, mainly from Germany and France, and even England. But it is Karl Marx that gave the best way to represent communistic ideas. And this branch is called Marxism. Uh, Lenin, if you know him, the emperor of Russia, was the one who said that the first stages of communism is what he implemented, but the last stages of communism is Marxism. So the best stage is Marxism. That's why it is best represented by Marxism. So it is a reaction to the disadvantages and injustices of capitalism. That's how it started. Even before, like we said, actually it started while the feudalistic system still existed and mercantilism, but only after the post-industrial revolution that communism started to appear as an ideology which many people followed. Now, what is the main idea of this ideology, of this economic system? It is the common share of the three main resources: mines, factories, and railroads. The key factors. We saw in ancient Rome that the government controlled the key factors. The same thing here, but the opposite. It is not the government or the state that should control these key factors, but it is the common share. It should not belong to anyone. But at the end, it still is in the hand of the government, which will lead us to two possible implementations of communism, or two school of thoughts, schools of thought in communism. We will talk about them at the last point. So simply, it denies the concept of private property. No one can make an enterprise of his own and own the means of production. If you are familiar a little bit with the works of Karl Marx or Marxist literature in general, it always talks about the means of production. It probably is the most used expression of Karl Marx in his book. Yes, so there are two distinct forms: libertarian and authoritarian. Libertarian communism calls for, obviously, the common share of resources, but it is not the government that controls it. It is governed by itself. How so? God knows. It's still something that they could not agree upon. As for authoritarian communism, it is clear it is the state that takes the role of governing everything. And obviously, which one do you think is the one that was implemented in reality? It is authoritarian communism because it is at least applicable. Libertarian communism uh, now is only about economics. They understood that it could not be a political system. So they say that only in economic that we can be communists, but the rest, it's whatever. Meaning free markets, but in a communist way, which is socialism. All right, this is something that I should mention. Socialism is what I just said. Now, I have a question for you. Of course, you are familiar with the fact that communism did not work. It was implemented in the Soviet Union, in different parts in South America, like Cuba, like Colombia, I believe, and other parts of the world. But it did not succeed. So, what is the reasons, or what are the reasons for this failure? Do you know any, or can you guess at least?
I believe it lacked individual contribution. For
All
example,
right, yes,
if a person like he knows his share, for example, he won't do extra to reach a better result or something like that. Innovation
very good,
and,
excellent. Yes,
and creativity was their main
right.
contribution.
Yes, it severely limits the individual capacity. Yeah, this is one reason why. There are other reasons. So we will discover the ideological flaws within communism. Why can't communism work? Communism, in its many branches, has been applied in reality to the point that a third of the world was under communist rule at one point. All right, a third of the whole world implemented communism. China, obviously, and the Soviet Union. These two are gigantic nations. It faced a lot of challenges, like, first, inadequate means of production. The means of productions stagnated at one point, and the state did not look to improve on them, to make them better. Why? Because they served their needs. And communism, as an economic system, is a closed system. All right, it deals with its own. There is no trade. There is no relations outside of your borders. So there is no way for you to try to compare yourself with others. We can see this some way in North Korea, even though, like I said, it is not real communism. Communism in its pure form does not exist. Also, economic stagnation due to state ownership. Even the economy itself stagnated. Why? Because your purpose and your goal is not to achieve high levels of economy. of wealth, of production. Your goal is to simply achieve sufficiency for as much or as many people as possible. And even then, they could not reach that. That's why uh, in parts of the Soviet Union, there were migraines. Yes, you can exist if you have something to do, no problem. I know that this session has taken so much, but my apologies. So I was saying that in some parts of the Soviet Union, in modern day Ukraine, there were migraines, there were crises, and people have died. Like, if I remember correctly, 20 million, 20 million people have died at some points due to the inability of the communist state to provide basic food and shelter. Moreover, the inability to measure production costs. This is a key point. Why? Because once the state owns the means of production, it is the state who knows how much it costs. But since you're using the same means of production, at one point you will not know the cost. You won't be able to calculate and make forecasts. Because what are you losing? You are not losing actually anything. It is the state that owns it anyways. So they had difficulty to understand production costs, therefore difficulty to understand how much the consumer has to pay. And therefore they were more times than not in a deficit. They were not making profits. They were making losses. However, the main reasons are deeper than economic flaws. What we discussed right now are economic flaws, and they are sufficient to understand that this economic system cannot be applied. But the real reasons are ideological. It is the lack of understanding of human nature that resulted in all of these deficiencies. If you think that all of the people will be happy to be equal, then you are simply mistaken and you do not know a single thing about human nature. This idea of total equality is really the downside and the doom of communism, which is ironic because it was the reason it bloomed, the reason why it rose to power and prominence. Yet it was the same reason that led to its downfall. Yes, it is very noble to think about the injustices happening in society due to social classes, etc., or capitalism. But do you have the solution to that? The real solution? If you do not understand the human nature, then it is impossible for you to have a solution. So, communism is considered as an end goal in itself. This is the ideological dimension. For communist people, it is their religion. Really. If you meet or know about communists, they were so infatuated and so dogmatic about communism that they gave up their lives for it. It was such a cause to live for communism or for communists. So it goes beyond economic matters. And that's how we have social communism. All right? It also exists and it is an ideology which goes hand in hand with the economic communism. It had its own stances on ethics, on religion, on choices, and as well freedom. It was a holistic way of life, so to say, but very flawed because it is essentially a human ideology that lacks objectivity. This is really what it surmounts to, and this is tied to what we saw in the theoretical part of the seminar. Without objectivity, you can never reach the right conclusions. Uh, I'm thinking of, let me give you the choice for those who remain. Would you like to continue? We still have some 4 or 5 slides, or we call it a session and we continue the next session, inshallah. What do you prefer? What do you find more suitable for you? Those who would like to continue can raise their thumbs up. Those who like to exit, thumbs down. All right, one of you has to go. All right. The next part of this lesson is very important, and I would like for as much or as many people to attend to it. So yes, let's save it for another day, inshallah. Right. Thank you for attending again. It is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for your participation, for your ideas, and I hope you benefited. I hope you found this session to be beneficial and exciting. Thank you once again and take care of yourselves and see you soon, inshallah.